on, guys? Johnny Bannon here at Triplet Technologies, and in this video we're going to be covering port security in our full and free CCNA course on YouTube. So if you like this content, please be sure to like and share and keep supporting our channel because I love making these videos for you guys. And if you actually want a full learning management system and a full self-paced course that's fully involved with an instructor, please check out that link in the description below where you can get access to our Academy site for a really low cost and get lifetime access to us, my team, and our training. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started going over port security, another security technology in our layer 2 security lessons. Okay, so we're going to start off by just going over what port security is, and this is a part of something called network access control. Now, for some of you that may be watching that have been doing networking for a while, you know that NAC is a lot more complicated than just a few switch port security commands. It involves AAA, .1x, TACX, and Radius. And you'd be correct. But this is a very specific Cisco technology that lets us do essentially MAC filtering. It lets us set a minimum and maximum, a maximum limit on MAC addresses on a switch port. So what this prevents is maybe that rogue user that's bringing in an access point to plug into your wall, that's trying to plug in a bunch of devices, and it's really just a good protection mechanism from anybody coming in to try to plug into your network from the wall jack. It's just a quick and easy way to deny them and put that switch port into an error disabled mode. So now with that being said, let's jump into port security. So our agenda, we're going to go over a quick overview, why we need port security, the operation of it, how it works, and then of course the configuration, and then also how do we clear it. So once a port goes into error disabled mode because somebody tripped port security, how do we clear that and get that switch port functional again? So a quick overview. So port security on switches protects our LAN infrastructure from rogue devices and something called CAM flooding attacks, or really MAC address flooding attacks. And what we mean by that is our layer 2 switches have something called a CAM table and a TCAM table, but that's beyond the scope of CCNA. But that CAM table, that content addressable memory or MAC address table, runs off CPU, meaning that it's limited in how many MAC addresses it can learn at once. So attackers could do a CAM flooding attack, which essentially is a denial of service attack on our switch by flooding millions of source MAC addresses to that CAM table and then getting our processor up to 99%, rendering that switch pretty much worthless. So what port security allows you to configure how many MAC addresses can be allowed on a single switch port. So if we configured Fast Ethernet 02 to just allow one MAC address, this attacker couldn't do this CAM flooding attack because the moment it sends this one, attaches it to that port, and says only this MAC address is allowed, just one, as soon as these other MAC addresses are ingress or inbound, it's going to error disable that port. So port security gives us control over our network access by limiting the amount of devices that can be connected. So again, why do we need port security? So switches make forwarding decisions based off destination MAC addresses or that CAM table, like I was already talking about. Switches do have a limited amount of CPU and space available for the CAM table because the main processing unit on a switch actually isn't CPU. Those individual switch ports use something called ASIC chips for the actual forwarding of frames at the port level, right? At that bit level. So the CPU is not necessarily very strong like even in our modern day computers. So malicious users can exploit the limited resources of a switch by flooding that switch with fake MAC addresses. In my environments that I've worked in, we've done this just as simple network access control. In the government, when we were in our secret system or top secret systems, our switches had port security on it. So a user couldn't come in and plug in their regular COTS or commercial off-the-shelf device into our secret wall jack, right? We don't want that. So port security is just a quick way to say, hey, we're only allowing one MAC address, and when that user gets onboarded, this is their computer, it's plugging into this wall jack, and if they try to plug in another computer, guess what? It's going to trip. So yeah, every time we had rotations come in, and a new commander, new officer in charge, a new manager wanted to fix the feng shui of the office, yeah, port security got tripped a lot, and we had to go in and clear it. But that's what it's meant for. It's meant for those rogue devices being plugged in. It's meant to protect against those CAM flooding attacks. So port security can limit the amount of MAC addresses allowed per interface. Now the operations. So port security is only configured on access ports because obviously a trunk port is going to see every single MAC address coming in and out of it from that switch. So we want to make sure that we do port security just on access ports. And once enabled, port security by default will only allow one MAC address per interface. That's its default behavior. And then it has 3 different violation modes, and the default violation mode is going to be shut down. Okay, we're going to get into that. But once that port security is tripped or it's violated, right, your 1 or 2 MAC addresses try to get on the port, it's going to go into error disabled mode, which pretty much renders that switch port worthless. By default, a switch's MAC address table or CAM table only holds a MAC address for 5 minutes or 300 seconds. On the CLI, it goes by seconds. So if 2 computers are plugged into that same port under 300 seconds, the port will become error disabled. Now, you may be wondering, well, okay, what's the point if I can just unplug my computer, wait 5 minutes, and then plug in another device? I just fooled port security. You would be right. But we have configuration options like Sticky that put that original MAC address onto the running config, and then that CAM flushing, where it flushes the MAC address table every 5 minutes, well, port security is only going to recognize that sticky MAC address, okay? And we'll get into that. All right, more port security operations. So again, it has those additional configuration options. So Sticky. Enabling Sticky will make the source MAC address learn to be saved into the running configuration. So that means even when we shut down the switch and turn it back on, we'll still have that same source MAC address that's supposed to be there, okay? Port security has 3 different violation modes. It has protect, restrict, and shutdown. Shutdown is the default mode. That's the default violation mode. And it's going to be the best security, right? So shutdown just completely renders that port worthless. Then we have our other 2, protect and restrict. So configuration. So one thing we got to note here, okay? It has to be an access port. So if we try to enable port security with this command right here, and this is what enables it, and we try to do that on a trunk, and it's not going to work, okay? Another key thing to note, this enables port security, okay? This is what enables it here. Because there's going to be other port security commands we're about to see that sometimes people will just go straight to setting the maximum amount of MAC addresses. They'll set sticky and forget that this is the command that actually turns on switch port security for that interface. Okay, and then right here we have our show command. So this is just the basic, this is really the only show command you need for port security is show port security. There it's going to show you the violation count, the action, so we're going to shut down. And then this is going to show us how many MAC addresses are allowed. So just by looking at this show command here, this output, everything's left at default, right? The default of 1 MAC address, the default of the security action being shut down. Now, some more additional configuration. So before I get into this, I just want to go over that sticky MAC address one more time. So imagine we have our switch here, okay? And PCA is right here. And PCA is a rogue user. He wants to do something malicious. So when he plugs into that wall jack, if we have port security enabled, that's that 1 MAC address that's going to be allowed, okay? And again, port security goes off the MAC address table, which learns via source MAC address, okay? So now we have our MAC address table that is saying on VLAN 1 on gig 00, we have MAC address AA, okay? That's PC's MAC address, AA. Well, now let's say the malicious user understands port security. They've done their research and they unplug computer A. They wait the 5 minutes and now this gets flushed. And now they put in computer B into this interface. Well, now our 1 MAC address is still allowed, and this could be like a Kali Linux box, okay? So imagine this is the computer that was given to him by the IT department, but now this is the Kali Linux box he plugged in, he or she plugged in to do some malicious attacks on our switch. Now, if we enabled sticky on that port, what would happen is that this source MAC address AA would also be saved into the running config So on that running config, it'd be like interface gig 00. Underneath it would say sticky AA. So even though he let that cam table flush after 5 minutes and plugged in this Kali Linux box, it's still going to say no. This is supposed to be the MAC address assigned to port 00. So now I'm still going to put you into an error disabled mode. Okay, so that's the sticky MAC address. And now let's say we lose power and the switch comes back up. It clears the MAC address table because that's learned in the CPU and the RAM, right? It's a dynamic table. Well, sticky will still say, hey, this MAC address belongs to gig 00. Now let's go over some of this additional configuration. So here we have switch port security. You set the maximum MAC addresses allowed. And then we have switch port security MAC address sticky. And then we can also change what it does with the violation. And then we can also just statically set the MAC address as well without even using sticky. We can just go in there and say, hey, this is the MAC address that's supposed to be allowed. Another key note of what we just went over. The port security table here sometimes doesn't always follow the MAC address table. And what we mean by that is this also has a flush counter that isn't always correlated to the MAC address table. So sometimes this will stay 1 even with the computer unplugged for 5 or 10 minutes. It just depends on the iOS. It just depends. And my, the switches we worked on, I forget what Catalyst version of switches were. Even if you unplugged the computer and waited and then plugged that computer, like 10 minutes you waited and plugged another computer in with a different MAC address, it still tripped because it still had this current address counter. I don't know what it was, but it's supposed to be based off the MAC address table, okay? But that's just some real world coming at you. For the test, just know that it's based off the MAC address table, this current address count right here. Another key thing to remember is none of these commands right here enable port security. These are additional configuration, but only one command enables port security, and that is the switch port security command without any of this additional configuration. This is the command that enables port security. That has to be done for all this to take effect, okay? And this too. All right, so that is going to be everything covering port security. If you enjoyed this video, or if you're an active duty, reserve, or National Guard soldier, you have $4,000 a year to actually take these boot camps, live virtual training, or self-paced courses for free because of your credentialing assistance program. Intrepid Technologies is a vendor on that credentialing assistance. So if you would like to use that program, check that link in the description below. Or if your unit and organization does CCNA boot camps or CompTIA boot camps, please feel free to reach out to me or my team. Click the link in the description below. We would love to come out and train your unit. We bring our test center, our computers, our labs, our hotspot, our Starlink terminal, everything, and give you a great 40 weeks of training with a really high pass rate. So thank you for viewing this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe.